All right. Didn't know if we'd do a Sunday night live show. I mentioned it, I think, during the live show on Friday after the semifinal, after the loss to North Carolina. But that might have been I thought at the time, I was like, well, maybe it's just the whiskey talking, but maybe we'll do a Selection Sunday show. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But then over the last hour or two, it just sort of occurred to me that, like, yeah, we got to do a live show. If ever there was a time for a live stream, sort of a spur-of-the-moment live stream to talk about things, this was the time to do it. Sunday, March 17th, 2024, in the evening. It's Selection Sunday, and Pitt was not selected for the NCAA Tournament. Pitt was invited to the National Invitation Tournament, and that invitation was declined. So your Pitt Panthers, their season has come to an end. 22-11 overall, 12-8 in the ACC regular season, fourth place finish in the conference, number 4 seed, win in the quarterfinals, lost to number 1 seed North Carolina in the semifinals, 9-9 record in quad 1, quad 2 games, 7 wins on the road, number 40 in the net ranking, number 40 on Ken Pomeroy's site. A whole bunch of other things that sort of speak well of the Panthers, speak highly of the Panthers. Not their non-conference strength of schedule, though. And if that's ultimately what it came down to, if that's ultimately what got to the Panthers to be held at the, number 4 among the next first 4 out, ostensibly being team number 72, and it was because of the games they played in November and December, and the games they scheduled to play in November and December, and that's what kept Pitt out. Well, I think it's not crazy to question the system. Now, this was a wild year. This was a crazy year, an unpredictable year with bid thieves all around. There's 5 conferences that were really viewed as having a favorite to win the automatic qualifying bid, and that team got upset along the way. The ACC included. NC State beating North Carolina stole a bid that could have gone to Pitt, or at least to one of the teams ahead of them in that first 4 out category, and created an opportunity for Pitt to come in. Duquesne did a little damage, Temple did a little damage. And then, of course, the wins by New Mexico and Oregon did damage. And all of those things, you had 5 conferences, the American, the AAC, the A10, the Pac-12, and the Mountain West, that have just 3 of those 5, I think it would have been 3, if 3 of those 5 have chalk hold, then Pitt's probably in the NCAA tournament, right? Or I guess maybe 4 of the 5. If you only have one major upset there, if you get chalk in most of those other tournaments where you expected to have chalk, then Pitt's probably in the NCAA tournament, or Pitt is in the NCAA tournament. But because of those upsets and that dastardly non-conference strength of schedule, the Panthers are staying home this March. And given the option to attend the NIT and participate in the NIT, the team declined. And I feel like we've got a lot to talk about on both sides of that, on the NCAA tournament snub, the NIT, declining, whatever we want to call it, the declining, I guess, by Pitt of the NCAA or the NIT invitation. And we have a lot to talk about on both sides of that. And this may end up, depending on how we feel by the end of this thing, this may just end up be a live taping of the morning Pitt for tomorrow. But I think it's going to be a Selection Sunday reaction show. And so let's get comments and questions here from Pitt fans. A lot of people jumping in already. There's a lot of comments in this chat screen, and we're going to try and get to as many as we can. This might just be a night for you guys to vent and me to occasionally chime in and complain about Virginia and TCU. And we'll talk about those teams for sure. Virginia, I don't know if it's the most egregious, but it's certainly an easy one to look at and find almost every number favors Pitt over Virginia, including head-to-head in a game that was played on the road. And if you want to say, well, you can't just base it off of one game, that's fine, but I think you can base it off an entire season and see that Pitt has a better resume than Virginia, but the Cavaliers are going dancing and the Panthers are not. We'll probably rant about some things like that a few times over the next however long we end up talking here, 45 minutes or an hour. But I want to get a lot of your comments and questions. Go on the chat screen right there. You can put all your comments and questions in. We'll read as many comments as we can. We'll answer as many questions as we can. If you want to make sure we read your comment or answer your question, you can be a super chatter. Down at the bottom there, where is it? It's down. Down at the bottom, you see a little $sign. You can click that, kick a couple bucks to the podcast, show a little support. We appreciate it for sure, and we will definitely read your comment or answer your question if you do that. Otherwise, we always ask you to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's where we have all our Pitt video content, our daily morning Pitt videos, live streams, usually scheduled live streams like a Wednesday night live stream. Our regular weekly Wednesday night show that we do every Wednesday at 8 o'clock, or post-game shows that we won't have any of those for a while, or emergency live streams like this one, and sometimes from good news, sometimes from bad news. And this was the latter more than the former. But we do it all right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you want to make sure you don't miss any of our live streams or any of our Pitt video content, subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Let's jump in on the chat here. Let's get some super chatters. Dan K was the first super chatter who jumped in and said, who makes this decision? Is it a vote by the team? So Dan, I think, is talking about the decision to decline the NIT invite. It feels redundant to call it an NIT invite, but that's what it is. You get invited to play in the National Invitation Tournament. Pitt has said no, and I believe it was a decision made by the players. Probably the players in concert with the coaches, but I believe if the players had said, we want to play, the coaches would have said, okay. I think there's probably a variety of reasons or a variety of motivations behind this decision, and one of them just might be motivation. We can all sit here and say as much as we want, like, well, you should be, motivated to go out and win no matter what the circumstance, no matter what's on the line, whether it's a Super Bowl or it's a preseason game, you should go out there and give your all. And that's great. But you're probably pretty pissed off that you got left out of the NCAA tournament. And you're rightfully pretty pissed off that you got left out of the NCAA tournament. And you might just be sitting back and saying, you know what, man? Screw that. We're not playing in that tournament. We should have been in the big dance. And I don't really know how much motivation we're really going to have to go into, the NIT, hosting games in front of a, half empty arena. I think I was just looking back when the last time Pitt played in the NIT, it was Jamie Dixon's next to last season, his penultimate season, and they hosted George Washington. They lost that game, and there was like 3,000 was the announced attendance. And attendance numbers, everybody lies about attendance numbers, right? So there was less than 3,000 people there. I don't even know if you're really making money at that point. Just to turn the lights on and pay the staff, you might be losing money to host that game. I saw somebody on Twitter say something like, I can't believe Pitt would give up the revenue. How much revenue do you think they're making from an NIT game? I mean, it's not like the CBI where you have to actually pay to be a part of that. You have to pay to participate in the CBI, or you did back when Pitt participated in 2012. The NIT, you don't have to pay, but you have operating costs associated with hosting games. Pitt probably would have been a number one seed. They would have hosted games for a while, potentially hosted 2 or 3 games or whatever it would be. You're not making money off of that. You're losing money because you're not going to draw a big crowd. Shoot, they could barely draw a good crowd for ACC games this season. And you're going to say that they're going to draw a good crowd for NIT games? It's not even like they're going to play Duquesne because Duquesne made the friggin' tournament. And so, I think there could be a real lack of motivation, a real question of like, why do we really even want to do this? And then on like the flip side, the administration and coaches are like, yeah, I mean, we'll lose money. So if you guys don't want to play, we're not going to force you to play in this tournament. Now, what's the motivation for the players to say they don't want to play? You know what I mean? Like, so we can sit back and say, yeah, I believe the team voted to not participate in the NIT. And I think that's true. I think they probably came to some agreement that they didn't want to play in that event. But there is a question of why they would not want to play in that event. I think there's a matter of a motivation, like I talked about. How motivated are they after feeling like they got snubbed? You can like turn around and be like, well, let's go win the NIT and show them they were wrong. Nobody's going to think that. Like, nobody's going to sit back and be like, oh, damn, we should have put Pitt in the tournament. Look how much they just smoked the NIT. Nobody has ever said that. Can you remember one time ever in your life where the reaction to the NIT championship was, boy, they should have been in the tournament? I mean, that probably was a thought, but it was a thought about that team likely before the NIT ever started. Nobody has ever looked at it and found the NIT to be, sort of justification of a team's resume. So they're not going to have that. I don't think that motivation's there. Let's show them. Let's prove them wrong. Because nobody's going to sit back and say, wow, we were wrong because you won the NIT. So I don't think there's that motivation. There is a question of, what do these guys intend to do with their offseason? What do these guys intend to play next year? And if there's someone who's thinking about looking to play somewhere else, or even considering those options, like considering the possibility of having those options, then they might look at the NIT and say, no thanks. Don't really want to be a part of that. And that's disappointing, but it's also, it's a reality. I think we know that that's, part of it as well. Generally, I would say probably the program, players and coaches alike, were just ready to move on. Disappointed with how this season ended, disappointed with how they feel like they got jobbed, and not wrongfully so, not wrongfully disappointed about that, and ready to just move on to the next stage of building next year's roster, finding out who's going to be on next year's roster, and how they're going to add and supplement those guys. So, to your question, Dan, I think the players make that decision, and I would assume, I don't know if it was as as much of a procedural as a vote. It was probably a discussion, and a conclusion was reached. At Harris is a super chatter, and so we have to read this. It says Jeff Capel is a tart. Get rid of him. No, I disagree. See. Hogmuncher's a super chatter, says 100% on board with not playing in the NIT. This is in 2005. Better to focus on the transfer portal and next year than play another mid-major. Well, I think you can do both at once. I think you can recruit. I think you can go after transfers. You can do all of those things and play in the NIT. I just think I understand wanting to make a clean break. And if you're not going to be 100% motivated to play in these games or win these games, then okay, just move on. Just move on and go to the next thing. Scott Eisenberg says, mostly disappointed for myself not being able to watch Blake Hinson again, but also for Blake Hinson himself that his last game in a Pitt jersey is one he'd rather forget. So personally, I'm with you, Scott. Like, I'm disappointed that I don't get to watch this team again. I wanted to see them make the NCAA tournament because I genuinely enjoyed watching this team play. I think this team was more fun to watch than last year's team, certainly than any of the 6 teams that preceded them. And maybe you could go back into the latter years of the Dixon era to find the last team that was as much fun to watch as this one is. Exciting, explosive guards, 3-point shooting from all over the place. They're a fun team to watch. And I was looking forward to seeing them play more games. I was looking forward to watching them play more games. I thought it was going to be, I thought it'd be entertaining. And everything that we said, and it was such a cliche to say, but it was very true, that this is absolutely the type of team that could go on a run in the NCAA tournament. If you put them in the field, they are very much capable of reaching the Sweet 16. I don't think there's any question about that. I think they have the firepower, the explosiveness, the scoring. They were really coming along on defense. They're a good rebounding team, particularly with good rebounding guards. They could make some noise and find themselves in the second weekend. I don't think there's any question about it. And from there, it's one good bounce this way or that way, one off night this way or that way from one of the other team's stars. And you could find yourself they could have made a run. They could have been a contender, but they never got the opportunity. And the reasons they didn't get the opportunity, non-conference strength of schedule, right? That was the biggest one. Non-conference strength of schedule. It doesn't matter that they won, the second most, road wins of any power conference team. It doesn't matter that they went 9-9 against quad 1 and quad 2 teams. It doesn't matter that they were a top 40 team in the net and in KenPom. It doesn't matter any of those things, that they finished 4th in a power conference. A conference that put 5 teams in the tournament. How do you have 5 teams from a conference and the team that finished 4th doesn't make it? I guess the way that happens is you have a team steal a bid. right? You have a team steal a bid. You have NC State come out of nowhere, make a Cinderella run, and win the ACC tournament. And that was ultimately, Pitt's resume put them on the bubble, at least the metrics that the tournament selection committee was considering. That resume, it put Pitt on the bubble. And then having the 5 conferences with the bid stealing, results, kick them out. Push them down to the 4th team out. And it's sort of an unfortunate confluence of events, definitely a bubble that shrank very abruptly over the last 2 days. And Pitt was one of the teams that lost out because of it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't look at a few teams that made it and say, hold on, how exactly is Virginia in ahead of Pitt? Virginia, who went 23-10 as opposed to Pitt's 22-11, but Virginia, who won 5 games on the road, Pitt won 7 games on the road, including a game at Virginia. Virginia, who went 2-7 in Quad 1 games, while Pitt went 4-6. They both had 500 records in Quad 1, Quad 2 games. Pitt was 9-9. Virginia was 10-10. Virginia didn't have any Quad 3 or Quad 4 losses. Pitt had two Quad 3 losses. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's the deciding factor. Maybe that's the difference. And Virginia's non-conference strength of schedule was 240 instead of 340, which, honestly, who cares after like 200? Are you really going to brag about having the number 240 non-conference strength of schedule? Is that really something to hang your hat on? Is that really the thing that gets you into the NCAA tournament? Is that you played the number 240 non-conference strength of schedule? Really? When one team has twice as many Quad 1 wins, when one team has more road wins, when one team beat the other team on the road, and we're going to talk about non-conference strength of schedule? TCU only had 6 wins on the road. TCU went 8-12 again in Quad 1 and Quad 2 games. TCU played 16 games against Quad 1 competition and won 5. Pitt played 10 games against Quad 1 competition and won 4. Almost the same number. TCU didn't lose any Quad 3 or Quad 4 games. So maybe that's the difference there. I don't know what kept this team. I mean, I know what kept this team out. I don't know why. These are the things that kept Pitt out when they have so many things that I think were going in their favor and certainly compare favorably to some of these other schools. I don't get it. Let's see. TJ DiStefano says, stupid move to play in the NIT even though it means nothing. More games for young guys. Home games means money and a chance to win. Stupid move to not play in the NIT, he says. More games for the young guys. I don't know if that matters. Ultimately, I mean, they just played 33 games. Does playing 2 games more or 3 games more going to make a huge difference in games where you don't know how motivated your guys are, you don't know how motivated the other guys are? Is that really going to matter? And like I said about the revenue, I'm not really sure you make all that much money. You probably lose money just playing in those NIT games. So I'm not really sure that it's a big revenue boost. Benjamin Glazer says, I totally get not going to the NIT because of the portal opening up tomorrow, which is just another thing that shows the NCAA does not care about these kids at all. I would think that, the portal opening up tomorrow would be more of a factor for the players than the coaches. The coaches can do what they need to do in the portal, even if they're preparing for a game. If a player wants to go into the portal, then he's probably not going to prepare for a game with his team. But at the same time, the coaches need to know who's going to be on the roster. Like, who's going to be on the team next year so you can prepare for it, so you can, go out and find the guys that you need to find. Imagine last year in March, you knew Dior Johnson wasn't going to be back. Imagine how you could have approached things and maybe the success you might have been able to have. I think they tried to get another guard to join this roster, but with Dior and these freshmen coming in, it was a tough sell. Well, if, let's say worst case scenario, Bub Carrington, Jalen Lowe, and Ishmael Leggett are all, planning to leave, The sooner you know that, the sooner you can find their replacements or work to find their replacements, and ideally run into less resistance convincing guys to join your roster with these guys not here. So the sooner you can get into that process, the better. Maybe that impacts the NIT decision, but again, that's not as much, that's a coach's thing, and I think if the players wanted to play in this, the coaches would have been willing to. Mark Shilaju says, using data is nothing but hypocritical justification. How does anyone justify putting Michigan State, Virginia, or Dayton, or a Dayton team that did not beat a single team in the tournament this season? Pitt got shafted. I don't disagree. Look, Pitt was 2-0 against NC State, right, who won the ACC and got the automatic qualifying bid. They got a win against Virginia. They got a win against Duke. They didn't get any wins against Clemson. So that's what? 4 wins against tournament teams? Virginia, Duke, NC State. It's pretty good. I mean, that's, pretty solid. It's interesting. I looked up the 5 ACC teams that made the tournament. NC State, Carolina, Clemson, Duke, and Virginia. Pitt was 4-4 against those teams in the regular season. David H2P says, I believe I called Pitt declining the NIT after the Carolina game. You might have, David. I don't remember that, but shout out to you if you did. Byron Flex says Pitt declining the NIT means only one thing: Pitt having issues signing players and/or players want to test their market value in the portal. I mean that it might mean that, Byron. I'm not sure that's the only thing it could possibly mean. I think there's a lot of reasons why Pitt might turn it down. Wolf HD says, insane. We saw 5 bid stealers this year. Really was the difference tournament versus offseason for Pitt. Still have no clue how TCU was so far above the cut line with a resume similar or worse than Pitt. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. And I think we'll probably come back to this. And I've said some version of this quite a bit over the past couple weeks, month or two. And certainly in the last few days, the last week or two. We can haggle for a long time about the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee's priorities, about what they considered, what they valued, how they made their decisions. We can go back and forth about that. And I think the conclusion we'll often arrive at is that Pitt got jobbed a little bit, that Pitt should have made the NCAA tournament, that obviously those bid stealers made things more complicated, but Pitt should have found their way in. But here's the thing. We can't act like Pitt is entirely blameless in this situation either. Okay? They're not. And I remember a couple of weeks ago doing like a morning Pitt or writing something about the 3 games that would come back to haunt Pitt. The 3 games that if Pitt missed the NCAA tournament, the games that we would look back and say that was a missed opportunity where they could have gotten themselves, they likely would have made it if the outcome would have been different. And somebody, I think it was our good friend Spenges on the message board, said, why are we even bothering with this? Or maybe it was somebody else actually on the board said, why are we looking back? Who cares? It doesn't matter what games could have got Pitt in. All they have to do is keep winning. And that's true. They did. But like here we are 2 hours after the, hour and a half after it's announced that Pitt missed the NCAA tournament field. And like, I'll absolutely come back to it again. Don't blow it against Missouri. That's number one. When you go to Syracuse, don't leave 16 points at the free throw line. That's number 2. And then the game at Clemson. They had a lead, right? Wasn't that the one where they were like up double digits in the first half? They were. They were up 11 or 12. Let me find that. Not at Boston College, at Clemson. They were up 11. Or up 10. Excuse me. They were up 10 with 9.5 minutes to go. And they led by 4 at halftime. But by that point, they had let Clemson back in. They had given Clemson an opportunity to get momentum back. Clemson might have gone away if you had kept that up and been up 15 at halftime. But they blew that opportunity. You win that game at Clemson, you're in. You win that game at Syracuse, you're probably in. You win, you don't lose that game to Missouri, you're probably in. Win any 2 of those 3, and you are in. Win all 3, and you are definitely in. Shoot, you win all 3 of those, you might be a top 7 seed or something like that. So we can't act like Pitt is blameless. And I don't even mean about scheduling the non-conference. I don't care how you schedule the non-conference. Schedule it however you want. You go out and win the games. And when you have that 1 or 2 power conference game in the non-conference, you got to win it. You know what I mean? You can't blow it. And like Jamie Dixon used to get a lot of flack around here for his non-conference scheduling. And like there would be like dumb opinions like, oh, this is why they always flame out in the NCAA tournament because they're not tested at all in the non-conference. Oh, okay. So the games they played in November and December did not prepare them for the games in March. Never mind all the games against Big East competition that they played in January and February. But you're right. It's because they didn't play good competition in November and December. No, where the non-conference hurt Jamie Dixon back in the day is that they would always lose like a seed line. Team should have been a 2 seed, they end up on the 3 seed. Team should have been 3, they end up as a 4. Maybe should have been a 1, they end up as a, well, maybe not the 1 to a 2, but you get my point. This was always the problem, is that we felt like Pitt got underseeded by the bigger number, over, whatever. That Pitt should have been a 2 but ended up as a 3, or should have been a 3 but ended up as a 4. And usually the rationale and the justification was that non-conference strength of schedule. So it was even an issue back then. Pitt didn't usually put themselves in a position to be left out of the tournament altogether. Why did this team end up, how did this team end up being in position to be out of the tournament altogether? I think some of it is, I'm not going to call it anti-ACC bias, but I think there's a perception problem with the ACC. For whatever reason, the conference doesn't have a great perception, even though they've had success in the NCAA tournament. They still have good teams. They continue to have good teams. And I don't know if it's because Mike Krzyzewski retired and Roy Williams retired and Jim Boeheim retired, and so that's taken some of the shine off of this league. I'm not sure. But there's a perception issue. And so I think a team like Pitt suffers from that. Virginia somehow didn't suffer from that. Clemson didn't suffer from that. NC State obviously won, and Carolina and Duke, they have to get in. That's what they do. Except last year, right? So I think there is a perception problem. I think that hurts Pitt. And then it was easy to find some of those flaws that the tournament committee likes to talk about, like non-conference schedule or well, that was pretty much it. Non-conference schedule. Oh, so what I was saying is that Pitt's not entirely blameless. There were some of those wins that they let get away. And I'm not even talking about, well, you got to beat Duke, you got to beat Carolina every time you play them. There were winnable games against, beatable opponents that would have made the resume look a little better and also not look worse, which is what that, Missouri game ultimately did. The Syracuse game at home doesn't look great. You got to change some of those outcomes. You have to win some of those games, and then it doesn't matter what your non-conference strength of schedule is because you made such a strong case with such a strong resume that you get in. MRA Pirates says the issue is that for some reason non-conference and overall strength of schedule are looked at separately. Why does it matter if the final is the same? I think why the committee has typically talked about non-conference strength of schedule is because it's something you have control over. I think what they've said is they want to see teams challenge themselves. And the only way you can really challenge yourself, you obviously can't pick your conference, right? You can't control that. But you can make an effort to challenge yourself in the non-conference. Those are games you schedule them year to year, and they'll look at whether you attempted to take on some challenges. And even for Pitt, they have the home game against Missouri, but that was part of the ACC-SEC challenge. They didn't choose that. That almost, it counts as part of their non-conference strength of schedule, but it almost doesn't. And it actually may be better for Pitt if it didn't count as part of their non-conference strength of schedule. Let's just take that out of there. That's not a game Pitt even scheduled. Or the Legends Classic. I think, it's sort of the same kind of thing. Like, you didn't pick that. You chose to play in the event, but you didn't really, so in terms of actually challenging themselves, Pitt only really chose to put a challenging team on the non-conference schedule with West Virginia, and West Virginia ended up stinking this year. So that really kind of didn't work out. Their one sort of opportunity at a game that they chose to, increase the strength of schedule, and West Virginia didn't live up to that. They still went on the road and won, but West Virginia didn't really, provide Pitt what it needed from that game. And so I think that's why the committee has typically looked at non-conference strength of schedule, particularly as separate from the overall strength of schedule, because it's games you can. Did you challenge yourself? Did you try to play challenging games in the early part of the season? When you had the option of who you were going to play, did you pick challenging opponents? And I mean, Pitt obviously did not. Julian Martin says, non-conference strength of schedule left us no margin for error. Hopefully we rectify that. Just need to schedule a few games versus projected top teams. Losing those games doesn't matter. Wins would almost guarantee a bid. Well, that's that's the tricky part, right? Is it really better for you to play tough teams and lose than to play lousy teams and win? Maybe you do create more of a cushion for yourself. Maybe you do give yourself an opportunity to blow a game here or there if your non-conference strength of schedule is, even though it's not even the games that we're talking about. You can actually make up for a loss in conference by losing to a good team out of conference. I mean, on one hand, I just want to sit back and say, pick the best teams. Put the best teams in the NCAA tournament. But I understand it's hard when you're looking at 300 and some teams to figure out who are the best 68 or who are the best 36 after the 32 automatic qualifiers. That's tough. It's tough to whittle it down like that. It is. It's a big challenge. And you need some way of sorting them. You need some metrics. You need some analytics to look at and say, to be able to compare Team A and Team B when they didn't play the same opponents, when they didn't play anything close to the same strength of schedule. Well, how are they as teams? How is their adjusted offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency and pace and all these different things, just to try to find a way to actually compare teams. And so I get that. I understand where the metrics come in, but at a certain point, you need to be able to say, is this one of the best 68 teams in the country? And if it is, they should be in. And Pitt was. Pitt is. John Kristovich says Pitt should not have turned down an invitation to the NIT. Yeah. I think it's, WRW Pitt says, why play in a meaningless tournament with the chance of getting injured? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't like I said, my main thought on Pitt and the NIT is I wanted to see this team play again. I thought it'd be fun to go to the Peterson Event Center and cover one or two more games. And watch Blake Hinson play. You know what I mean? Watch Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe play together again. See if Guillermo could knock down 4 threes to hit my bold preseason prediction that the Twins would go for 45 3-pointers, which when he hit those 2 early in the Carolina game, he hit 2 in the first 5 minutes, and that put the Twins combined at 41 threes for the season. I was like, oh my God, they're actually going to do it. Despite Jorge only playing half the season, they're actually going to get to the 45 threes that I predicted. I don't think he hit another one after that, and now the season is over. So it looks like my bold preseason prediction did not come to fruition. Houston also, his bold preseason prediction was Pitt was going back to the NCAA tournament. That didn't work out. Matt predicted that Pitt would be top 5 in the ACC. He got that one right, but Stephen Gertz predicted that Federico would be the ACC Defensive Player of the Year. That was off. And then Jim Hammett predicted that Bub Carrington would be a one-and-done guy. So we'll find out about that one. That one's still lurking out there, but the rest of us, well, me, Steven, and Houston all got our predictions wrong. But season. See, we got a lot of comments and a lot of questions here. Try and get through as many as we can. If you want to be a super chatter, we will definitely get to your comment and your question. Just when you're a super chatter, make sure you post your comment with your super chat. I'm going to go through as many. We'll just burn through these and stop and chat about every now and then. Matt Paris says, I feel like their non-conference schedule hurt them this year. It sucks, but it was a factor. Yeah, I think you're right. John Kristovich says, Jeff Capel is a good coach. Pitt deserved to be in the tournament. I think you're right about that, too. Let's see. Julian Martin says TCU beat Houston and Baylor. Northwestern beat Purdue and Illinois. We needed to win versus Florida or Carolina to match that. I mean, they beat Duke at Duke, right? I mean, that's a top 10 net ranking win. They beat, beating Duke at Duke. They beat Virginia at Virginia. They won. They've won. I'm not going to get into comparing the resumes and things like that. Yeah, other teams have good wins. I don't think there's any question about it. Other teams have good resumes, but Pitt does too. And Pitt, I think, has the resume of a tournament team. I do think the 5 bid stealers hurt them the most, but I think there's also a debate about whether Pitt should have been that close to the cut line to begin with. Should Pitt have been that close to the bubble to begin with their record? Or should they have been a little bit more safely in? Should they have had a little more wiggle room so that if there are 3 or 4 or 5 bid stealers, that they're able to survive that and stay in the tournament field? Navin Johnson says, I feel like the strategy of cupcake non-conference games no longer works for Pitt. This year, obviously, it didn't. You know what I mean? This year, it obviously was a factor that hurt them. This year, obviously, it cost them a chance to make the NCAA tournament. So, yeah. I think you're right. But, what does Jeff Capel do for next year? Does he try to change it for next year? Don't they have the non-conference? Was the non-conference already announced? Or was that just ACC opponents? I thought I saw something. I don't think next year's non-conference opponents have been announced. I have to look that up. I should know that by now, but I don't. Let's see. Epic Steel 8 says, why do you think Virginia made it over us? I think Virginia's biggest strength over Pitt was their non-conference strength of schedule. Really, if you compare the numbers, they were 236 in non-conference strength of schedule. Pitt was 340, but Pitt ranked higher on KenPom and the net rankings. They both had 500 records against Quad 1 and Quad 2 games. But Virginia, most of their Quad 1 and Quad 2 wins came in the Quad 2 grouping. They were 8-3 against Quad 2 teams, whereas Pitt was 5-3 against Quad 2 teams. Virginia was 2-7 in Quad 1 games. Pitt was 4-6, so Pitt had 4 Quad 1 wins, and Virginia only had 2. The biggest difference, the only real difference, is they had no Quad 3 or Quad 4 losses. Pitt had 2 in the Quad 3 region, or Quad 3 area, and then Virginia had a better non-conference strength of schedule. That might be it. Paul Sebastian says, does this snub cause players that said they're staying to end up leaving? I don't think so. I really don't. I think anybody on that team right now, I don't think there's anybody on that team saying, man, we got snubbed because I'm at Pitt. I'm going to now go somewhere else where we won't get snubbed like that. I think probably to a man, they all feel like they got snubbed because they got snubbed, because they, probably feel, I believe that they feel they belong in the tournament and should have been there. I think anybody who leaves or is going to leave is going to do so because they want a different opportunity. Probably NIL induced, unless they're looking to go to the NBA. And I'll say this, we should just touch on it real quickly. Bub Carrington said after the game he's looking forward to coming back stronger and better, looking forward to being with Joe and Lowe, one of the best backcourts in the country next season and all of this. He was asked, just to be clear, you're saying you intend to come back next year to Pitt, and he said for sure. That's great. I think that's great that Bub Carrington said that. I think that's exactly what he should say in that setting. I put an article on the website on Panther-Lair.com about Bub Carrington saying that. But, I mean, we're all adults here, right? We've all been around college sports long enough, and we know, like, we'll see. We'll see if you come back. I like, and that's not a question of Bub Carrington or anything like that. It's just, it's the reality of college sports. You believe it when you see it, because a guy like Bub Carrington, a guy like Jalen Lowe, maybe even Ishmael Leggett, now that you can transfer twice without having to sit out, like, these guys are going to have opportunities to go elsewhere, and it's going to cost some money to keep them here. And that's not a reflection on Bub Carrington or Jalen Lowe or Ishmael Leggett personally or individually. Not one of those guys has ever said it to me. Not one source has ever said, like, hey, listen, those guys are going to cost a lot of money. It's just the reality of college sports right now. And if you want to keep two sensational freshman guards like those guys, it's going to cost. And so, like, Bub Carrington, while he sat in that locker at Capital One Arena after the game on Friday and said, yeah, for sure, I plan on coming back here, he might have meant it when he said it. He might have meant it. But things can always change. And there's a lot of time, and there are a lot of conversations to have, and a lot of time to spend thinking about it. So I'm firmly in the wait and see camp on that one. And but I don't think this NCAA tournament snub will have much of anything to do with it, would be my guess. RJ Seaman is a super chatter at the bottom here, says clearly, okay, he just retracted his message. I'm not really sure what you were saying, so I apologize if you want to shoot that one over again. I appreciate it, but not really sure what your message was going to be there. Trying to scroll through here. You guys got a lot of things to say. I don't want to hang up on the show just yet, but let's see what everybody has to say here. WRW Pitt says Pitt needs to schedule better next season. Play Duquesne is one. The tourney in New York. Ask for a Mountain West team and play a team picked to finish first in the low-level conferences. Yeah, that was something Jamie Dixon always tried to do, but he still always got dinged for his non-conference strength of schedule. Putting Duquesne back on the schedule jukes the numbers. That would have been a better game. That would have been a better win. I think it would have ended up being like a quad 2 game for Pitt or something. So then they're 10-9 against quad 1 and quad 2 opponents. Like, you juke the numbers. So, like, it's not even about actually getting good games. It's just about playing the numbers game, which I guess it is about that. You know what I mean? Like, everybody else is figuring it out. You need to figure it out too. And this is the Big 12 thing. Okay, this is where the Big 12 figured it out. This is where they cracked the code, and this is where the ACC needs to crack the code. And every time Jeff Capel talks about conference leadership needs to do this or that, or we as a conference need to collectively, this is what he's talking about. It's not about scheduling more challenging teams in the non-conference. I mean, it can be about that, but I don't think that's what Capel is talking about. And it's certainly not the code that the Big 12 cracked. Here's what it is. It's getting everybody else in the ACC to schedule those crappy non-conference games. Okay, because when you look at TCU and you look at, I feel like half of the Big 12 is outside the top 300 in non-conference strength of schedule. Like, literally half the league is outside the top 300 in non-conference strength of schedule in KenPom. So what gives? How did they all get such net rankings? Because they all scheduled that way. So when they all went into the non-conference, they all beat the crap out of those teams. And because the net ranking, because margin of victory is a factor that influences net ranking, they all got bumped up in the net rankings because they beat the crap out of those lousy teams they played. So that then when they faced each other, their schedules were like littered with quad 1 and quad 2 games. You know what I mean? Like, look at, let me bring up the net rankings. Okay. TCU played 16 games against quad 1 opponents. Pitt played 10. Oklahoma, 16 games against quad 1 opponents, 5 games against quad 2 opponents. It's 21 games, and Pitt played 18, but 8 of those were quad 2. 16 games for Oklahoma just in the quad 1 range, right? And I can scroll through here. It's because they all juked their stats. Texas had 14 games against quad 1 opponents. Texas Tech played 15 games against quad 1 teams. And they got it because they boosted their own, like each team within the conference boosted its net ranking by beating the living hell out of those crappy teams they played in the non-conference. So then when they faced each other, they all were getting quad 1 and quad 2 games. You see what I mean? Like, so either you schedule tougher, like either you make your own schedule more difficult, or the rest of the conference gets in line and does the same thing. Because I even asked Jeff Capel that, and he didn't really have an answer because I don't think he wanted to say what I just said. But when we were having this was late in the season as a lot of this conversation about scheduling was coming up, and he was talking about scheduling smarter. And I said, just, in the context of this season, how could you guys have scheduled quote unquote smarter? Because you had 4 power conference games, right? And like 3 of those you didn't even choose. The ACC SEC game was just given to you. You chose to be in the Legends Classic, and then you picked the West Virginia game. Otherwise, you guys scheduled terrible. You had a terrible schedule, which basically puts you right in line with what like TCU and these other schools were doing. So what did you guys need to do better? And all he was like, well, we expected Missouri to be better. We expected West Virginia to be better, this and that. The reality is, the answer is, how could you do better? The rest of the conference could get in line and schedule like that as well. That is probably the solution, unless the algorithms and codes are changed. That's what the Big 12 figured out. Can the ACC figure that out as well and get everybody on board to do it? That's the big question. All right, let's keep rolling here. Here's RJC, man, as a super chatter. I don't see your comment, though, buddy. You had one and you redacted it. I'll try and find. You got a few comments in here, RJC, man. I'll try and find out what. I'll find one. Where are you? Man, so many of you guys commenting. Here, RJC, man. Here's a comment for you. You were a super chatter, so I'll read this one. Control the controllables. The strength of schedule was a joke. Blame the people in charge. Well, I just addressed that. MRI Pirates says SOS. The strength of schedule would have been in the 200s if West Virginia and Missouri didn't suck. Yeah, that was a problem. Those teams should have been better than they were. You know what? Julian Martin says Virginia beat Florida and Texas A&M. 0 quad 3 losses, 157 net out of conference strength of schedule. Basically, after Missouri, we had no room for error. We needed at Syracuse or at Miami at least to have a chance. The at Miami game is one that I don't mention as often. I talk about Missouri. I talk about the Syracuse game on the road and the Clemson game on the road. The game at Miami, I mean, that is just a bad loss. Right? Did that end up as one of the quad 3 losses? I think it might have. It was on the road, but I don't know where did Miami. Miami was 101, so I think that would still be quad 2 on the road. But that's one that probably should get talked about more. That was a bad loss. Let's see. Scrolling through here, got a lot of comments. Want to find the good ones. Hog Muncher says I was working at the Peterson Event Center in 2014 when we last made the NIT. That game had maybe a couple hundred in attendance. You could tell the players were checked out as they choked to George Washington. Why bother with that? And that's that's a point we made right at the beginning. You're absolutely right. I mean, that comment might have been from right at the beginning, but there's very little upside to it. The upside is for us, those of us who watch the team. For the players, the coaches, administration, there's not a lot of upside to it. I wish they would play. I would like to see them play. I understand why they're not. Let's see. Just scrolling through here. Here's one. Iceman, Pitt has always been disrespected by the NCAA tournament, even when they were really good. Seedings. Yeah, and Iceman, I talked about that a little bit. That, even back then, Jamie Dixon was getting the non-conference strength of schedule held against him. Pitt would be awesome. Pitt would be great, and they'd end up a 3 seed when they should have been a 2, or a 4 seed when they should have been a 3. And usually the rationale given was the non-conference strength of schedule. They didn't challenge them in November and December. Right or wrong, that was the case. John Kristovich says Jeff Capel should be the one that makes the decision to play in the NIT. I think you have to do it with the players. I think this is very much a player-led team. I think a lot of the success they've had has come from the players. Even Capel told the story of how, one of their very first practices, he was getting ready to go, give the final, talk at the end of practice, and all of a sudden he noticed Blake Hinson was doing it. So he just let Blake do it and listened, and, okay. And then, the next day he was about to go do it, and there's Hinson doing it again. And he listens, and he's like, well, that was better than what I was going to say. So it just became a thing that Hinson did, and Hinson was the one who was talking to the team at the end of every practice now. I think that, players have led the turnaround in the culture at Pitt over the last 2 years, and I think that's a big part of the reason for the success, and I don't think Capel would go against their wishes on something like this. I think there's probably very few coaches in the country who would go against their players' wishes when it comes to playing in the NIT. I think if the players expressed that they didn't want to participate, most coaches would say, "Okay, I'm on board with that. I'll let you guys pick. You guys don't want to play, then we're not going to force you to do it." I'm not really sure you could force them to do it. I think you'd have to, I think you'd have to go by their wishes, and you should, in my opinion. Dennis Hurl says, I agree. I hate this so much for Blake. He helped put Pitt back on the map, and he deserves to be playing in the NCAA tournament. Yeah, I agree. It's too bad for Blake Hinson to have to go out like that. It's too bad for Blake Hinson to finish his career with that Carolina game. I'm sure he would like to be remembered for a lot of games other than that, but that's probably one that's going to stick in him as well. I think it's the final memory of Blake Hinson in a Pitt uniform. I don't think it'll be the lasting memory of Blake Hinson in a Pitt uniform. Some of those threes at Duke or standing on the table at Duke, that's, I think those are the lasting memories for me, at least. But it's unfortunate. It's disappointing that his final game, he really wasn't a factor. Not a positive one, at least. And it was a big game on a big stage. Let's see. Just try and get a few more comments in here. I'm going to scroll to the bottom. We'll see what you guys have to say down here. Get a few more comments before we turn in for the night. Trying to just skip over all the same jokers who are saying the same things over and over again. Homer Simpson says, if you don't want to play in the NIT, don't ask for fan donations. I don't get the connection there. Like, I know the fans want to see the team again, but, like, I mean, let's be honest. Like, you go to that game, right? Let's say you go to the NIT game. Let's say you're one of the few hundred who show up for the NIT game. How hard are you cheering? How excited are you? You're watching an exhibition game at best, a consolation prize that's not even that good of a prize. Are you even... Like, how motivated are you as a fan? Like I said, I know I said, I wish we could watch this team again. I wish we could watch this. But we want to watch this team in a situation with consequence, a situation of significance, not the NIT. I can't fault the players and coaches at all for this. I think it's totally understandable. And, there was a point like last week where I was like, yeah, I think they would play. I don't know why they wouldn't, Chance to keep competing, chance to keep playing together and all of that, but I mean, I kind of get it. I kind of get it. I think I can imagine how they're feeling tonight, and their lack of interest in going further and continuing to play or playing in that event. And I'll say this: the upside is we don't all have to wait until 9:30 to watch the NIT selection show. We got that out of the way, so we appreciate Pitt announcing this sooner. RJ Seaman 38 feels like I didn't read his comment or question, but I did read one of them. And then you redacted your one comment. So if you want to make another comment here in the next few minutes, I will read it. But here. Okay. Wolf HD says, I feel bad for Capel. He's going to get a ton of flack for being somewhat unlucky. Not his fault Xavier Johnson left and Pitt only had freshman guard. Not his fault Dior Johnson left and Pitt only had freshman guards. They needed time to develop and the bubble wasn't waiting. Yeah, like, I don't know. I mean, I think even if you have Dior Johnson on this team, he's still a very inexperienced player, right? He's not going to change anything about that. I don't know if there was too much luck involved with this season. It's unfortunate that Jalen Lowe was a little hurt early on. It was unfortunate that Ishmael Lega got hurt near the middle of the season, but that ended up working out because Lowe stepped into the starting lineup, and I think that was a really good move. I think Jeff Capel has had some bad luck in previous years, some of his own doing or some he had a hand in and some that was just sort of dealt to him. So I think he's had some bad luck in previous years, but I don't know if that was really the case this year. RJ Seaman 38 replies to Wolf HD, says, Wolf, bad luck choosing to keep a violent offender to stay on the team. I just lost it. That he believed the board would side with him, arrogant, much like the worst schedule. I don't know if there's a lot to be gained by relitigating the Dior Johnson situation or Jeff Capel's decisions therein. I think he wanted to stand by his guy, whether that was the right decision or not, or the right stance to take or not, is probably a debate for another day. I don't know if we're going to resolve. I know we're not going to resolve that debate right here. I don't know if we stand to gain a lot by even engaging in it. Anthony Tennyson says, hey, Chris, it was a great season because of how everything played out with the young guys growing up. Supposedly coming back, they will be good again next year and they will make the tournament. Look, if all these guys come back, if Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett are on this team again next year, you add in Brandon Cummings to that group. You bring in some transfers to fill in some spots. Like, just with the backcourt alone, this should be an NCAA tournament team. I mean, they are going to be dominant with those three guys. They should be really, really good. But you got to get all those guys back. That's the key ingredient. You have to get all of those guys back. And we'll find out. It's going to take a little while. It's going to be interesting to watch, but you got to get those guys back. Let's see. All right, last one. Peninsula P asks, does Guillermo Diaz-Graham start at the 4 next year? He could. He could, particularly if you got Papa Conte ready to play. If you have Federico back, Guillermo could be your starting 4, and you could have those big guys on the court together. He's that stretch 4 who can go out and shoot. You don't need him to play center if you have Papa Conte. He could very well be your starting 4, and then you can mix and match how you want to play it after that. But you could have a starting lineup, again, if everybody comes back, of Lowe, Carrington, Leggett, Guillermo, and Federico. That's an interesting-looking lineup. One that we saw at times this season. Not very often, but at times. And that would certainly be an interesting-looking lineup if they went with that. Could be a pretty potent lineup as well. All right. Selection Sunday live stream, just to talk about it. And I appreciate everybody who chimed in to talk about it tonight. Certainly everybody with the comments and questions in the chat. All the super chatters for sure. We appreciate you guys. And everybody who likes this video and subscribes, we appreciate you. I don't want to say the most, but we appreciate you a lot. So like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and then stay tuned over at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com to never miss any of our Pitt coverage. We have lots of Pitt content, football, basketball, and recruiting at Panther-Lair.com, and we have message boards where you can talk to other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I know it was on short notice, but I'm glad we could do it, and had a pretty good crowd here. We appreciate everybody who tuned in. We'll have a morning pit for you tomorrow. We'll get some new, fresh thoughts. Some of them you probably heard tonight, but we'll get some new, fresh thoughts for you in the morning. So tune in for that morning pit, and yeah, have a great rest of your Sunday night. Try to think about something other than college basketball, if you can, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow morning on the morning pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.